am not a player, but I know the game play with my feelings. I will show you exactly why I retired. You can only be fooled in a game if you believe the game is real. Most people don't even know they're playing until they lose something they can't get back, their peace, their dignity, their trust. And sometimes the most dangerous game of all isn't played on a board, in a casino, or on a field. It's played in the human heart. I am not a player. I never wanted to be. But somewhere along the way, I learned how the pieces move, how the cards are dealt, how the emotions are pushed around like pawns on a chessboard. People will test you, not always out of malice, but because they have learned that life is about winning rather than understanding. They'll play with your feelings the way a gambler toys with chips, risking nothing of their own but taking everything from you. And so I decided to retire, not because I was defeated, but because I finally understood the design of the game itself. In life, you can win by scoring points, or you can win by refusing to keep score at all. The day I walked away, I stopped being a character in someone else's play and started becoming the author of my own. There's a reason human beings are so fascinated with games. They have rules, players, strategies, and an ultimate goal. In a game, you know exactly where you stand, either ahead or behind, winning or losing. But the most treacherous games are the ones you didn't agree to play, the ones without a scoreboard, the ones where the only prize is control over your emotions. Emotional manipulation is one of those games. It's not played with dice or cards. It's played with glances, silences, and carefully chosen words. The person playing against you may never admit they're doing it. In fact, some are so skilled they might not even be fully aware. They've simply learned over a lifetime how to get what they want by bending someone else's heart. The first step in understanding this game is to recognize that manipulation is never random. There is always a pattern. It might begin with charm, flattery, attention, promises. Then comes the shift, subtle criticisms disguised as jokes, guilt presented as concern, or the silent treatment delivered as space to think. Each move is designed to provoke a predictable reaction in you: defensiveness, apology, or self-doubt. In other words, they create a rhythm, and the more you dance to it, the easier you are to control. This isn't about good people versus bad people. It's about awareness versus unawareness. You can be intelligent, compassionate, and strong, and still fall victim to these games if you don't realize they're being played. Think of it like walking into a chess match blindfolded. You don't see the board, but the other person knows exactly where every piece is. The outcome is inevitable unless you take off the blindfold. Taking off the blindfold means paying attention not only to what people say, but how you feel after they say it. Do you feel drained after every conversation? Do you often find yourself apologizing without being sure what you've done wrong? Do you sense that the rules keep changing, so no matter what you do, you can't win? These are signs you're not in a conversation, you're in a game. But here's the interesting part. Once you know the moves, the game loses its power. It's like seeing the magician's trick in slow motion. The illusion no longer fools you. The guilt trip becomes obvious. The backhanded compliment is instantly recognized for what it is. The sudden silence is no longer a mystery. It's a calculated tactic. And with that awareness, you no longer react automatically. This is why understanding emotional manipulation is not about learning how to counterattack. It's about learning how not to be moved like a pawn. The manipulator thrives on predictable reactions. Remove the predictability, and they lose the leverage. Sometimes that means responding with calm where they expect anger. Sometimes it means walking away where they expect you to chase. And sometimes it means simply smiling and saying nothing at all. This is not an easy lesson, because it requires stepping out of the emotional storm long enough to see the sky. You have to train yourself to observe instead of absorb. You have to listen not just to their words, but to the effect those words have on your inner balance. And perhaps most importantly, you must remember that you are not defined by the role they've assigned you in their game. The truth is, there's a kind of quiet power in knowing the game without needing to win it. It frees you from the constant push and pull of emotional battles, It allows you to stand firmly in your own space, grounded and unmoved. When you reach that point, you can smile, not because you've beaten them, but because they can no longer beat you. Knowing the rules of a game is not the same as playing it. A wise person can walk into a room full of competition, power struggles, and silent strategies, and yet remain untouched, not because they've outplayed everyone, but because they've understood the very nature of the game itself. When you understand the structure, you start to see that these emotional contests run on predictable fuel. Ego, insecurity, the need for control, the craving for validation. You begin to recognize that every manipulative interaction follows a pattern, an unspoken rulebook passed down through repeated human behavior. Some rules are simple. If I make you doubt yourself, I have more influence. Others are more complex, weaving charm and cruelty together until you can't tell them apart. Most people, once they learn the rules, feel tempted to play better. They want to match manipulation with manipulation, strategy with strategy, in the belief that victory comes from mastering the same tools their opponent uses. But that's the trap. The moment you play on their terms, you've already surrendered the most important thing, your own ground. True mastery lies in refusing to be drawn into the same energetic frequency. Imagine a chess grandmaster being challenged to a game, but instead of sitting at the board, they simply stand and watch. The opponent keeps moving their pieces, waiting for a response, but none comes. The game collapses not because someone lost, but because one person refused to participate. In emotional terms, this means you do not argue to prove your worth. You do not react to bait. You do not scramble to meet ever-changing demands. Instead, you step back, observe, and hold your center. Holding your center is a discipline. It's not passivity. It's a conscious choice to keep your energy focused on things that matter. When you see the manipulator's tactic, a guilt trip, a passive-aggressive remark, you acknowledge it without feeding it. This isn't about ignoring reality. It's about refusing to turn their drama into your reality. You stop being a pawn because you no longer move in reaction to their hand. Paradoxically, this level of non-participation often feels like the most threatening thing you can do to a manipulator. Their strategies only work when you respond the way they expect. If they press a button and nothing happens, the button becomes useless. This is when they realize they no longer have control. And that can be more disarming than any counterattack. But let's be honest, this isn't easy. Everything in human nature wants to defend, to explain, to prove, and that's exactly why the game is so effective. It's built on the natural human desire to be understood and respected. Resisting the pull means letting go of the need for approval from those who thrive on keeping you off balance. You begin to see that there's no real winning. In a game built on emotional exploitation, there's only staying in it or stepping out of it. And stepping out doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care too much about your peace, your dignity, and your clarity to trade them for a temporary point scored in someone else's match. When you adopt this perspective, life becomes less about beating people at their games and more about recognizing which games are worth playing at all. Most are not. The energy you once spent trying to win is now spent building things, relationships, work, art, joy, that aren't dependent on outsmarting anyone. In the end, the quiet awareness of the rules, paired with the refusal to play, is the greatest freedom you can give yourself. It's not a victory parade, it's a liberation. And once you've tasted it, you'll wonder why you ever picked up the pieces in the first place. There is a moment in every person's life when they realize that their emotional well-being is not a shared responsibility. It is entirely their own. This realization often arrives after years of letting others push, pull, and twist our emotions like strings on a puppet. The game of manipulation thrives when there are no clear lines between where you end and another person begins. That's why emotional boundaries are not just a preference, they are a necessity. Boundaries are often misunderstood. People think they are walls, cold, unfeeling barriers meant to shut others out. In truth, boundaries are more like maps. A map doesn't lock anyone away. It simply shows where the roads are, what terrain belongs to whom, and where the limits of safe travel lie. In relationships, whether romantic, familial, or professional, your boundaries say, here is where my peace lies, here is what I can give, and here is where I must stop giving to protect my own health. The challenge is that those who play with your emotions often test these boundaries deliberately. They want to see if your lines are drawn in pencil or in stone. They might call you selfish for saying no, dramatic for pointing out their hurtful words, or overly sensitive for expressing your discomfort. These tactics are not random. They are pressure tests, probing for weak spots in your self-respect. When you don't have clear boundaries, your emotional state is at the mercy of someone else's moods. If they're happy, you feel safe. If they're cold or critical, you spiral into doubt. It's like living in a house without a door. Anyone can walk in, rearrange the furniture, and leave chaos behind. Boundaries are the door. They don't mean you stop letting people in. They mean you decide who comes in and under what conditions. Establishing boundaries starts internally. You have to know deep within yourself what you will and will not tolerate, not in a reactive way, but in a calm, grounded certainty. This clarity becomes your compass. When someone tries to cross the line, you recognize it instantly, not because you're hypersensitive, but because you've taken the time to define what respect looks like for you. Of course, setting boundaries often comes with pushback, especially from those who benefited from your lack of them. They may try harder to guilt you, shame you, or pull you back into their emotional orbit. This is the point where many people crumble, thinking that holding firm is cruel. But it is not cruelty. It is a declaration that you value your peace as much as they value their control. Ironically, strong boundaries don't push away the right people, they attract them. Healthy, respectful individuals will not feel threatened by your limits. They will feel safer because they know where they stand with you. Boundaries create clarity, and clarity creates trust. And here's the paradox. When your boundaries are strong, you no longer need to defend them with force. Your calm consistency speaks for itself. You stop explaining endlessly why you won't accept certain behavior. You simply stop engaging with it. Your energy is no longer spent trying to change people who refuse to change. Instead, it's spent on things that nourish your relationships, that give as much as they take, work that aligns with your values, moments that bring you stillness instead of exhaustion. In the end, emotional boundaries are not about building a fortress. They're about building a foundation. Without them, you are vulnerable to every shift in someone else's weather. With them, you are steady no matter how strong the winds blow, and once you've built that steadiness, the game of manipulation becomes powerless because you no longer live on a board where others get to move your pieces. There comes a point when you realize that staying in the game isn't a sign of strength. It's a form of surrender. Many people mistake endurance for victory, thinking that if they can just hold on longer, they'll eventually win. The manipulators respect or change their behavior. But in reality, the game itself is designed so that no matter how long you play, you lose pieces of yourself in the process. Walking away is often seen as weakness. People say, you gave up, or you couldn't handle it. But this misunderstanding comes from a culture that glorifies constant fighting. We are taught to stay in battles, to prove ourselves by surviving them, as if endurance alone is a badge of honor. Yet there's a difference between courage and captivity. Courage is choosing your battles wisely. Captivity is staying in every battle because you're afraid of what it means to walk away. To retire from an emotional game is not to admit defeat. It is to graduate from it. You've studied the moves, learned the patterns, and understood the costs. You see that your energy, your joy, and your peace are far too valuable to be spent in endless defense. And so you do the most powerful thing possible. You stop showing up. When you withdraw your participation, the entire structure collapses. These games rely on your responses, your outrage, your explanations, your attempts to fix what they deliberately keep breaking. Remove your reaction, and the manipulator finds themselves standing on an empty stage, performing to an absent audience. Without your attention, their drama cannot survive. This doesn't mean you leave in anger or bitterness. In fact, the most profound walking away is done with a clear and quiet mind. You don't storm out, you simply step aside. You don't slam the door. You close it gently and lock it from the inside. This is not running away from a problem. It's choosing not to live in a place where the problem is the foundation. Of course, walking away requires a certain level of self-trust. You have to believe that you will be okay without their approval, their validation, or even their presence. And that can be frightening, especially if the game has gone on for years, becoming part of your identity. But here's the truth. Once you leave, you'll find that the silence you feared is actually peace. The emptiness you dreaded is space to grow, and the loss you braced for is the start of freedom. This is mastery, not in the sense of outsmarting another person, but in mastering your own need to prove anything to them. You're no longer driven by the compulsion to show them your worth. You already know your worth, and because you know it, you don't need them to confirm it. Ironically, the moment you walk away, you take control of the very thing they've been using against you, your emotional state. You choose where your energy goes, and suddenly, it's no longer wasted in conflict. It's invested in your own growth, your own joy, your own creations. You reclaim your time and mental space, both of which are priceless. The people still trapped in the game may never understand your decision. They might see it as weakness, avoidance, or even betrayal, but their perspective is shaped by the fact that they're still playing. From the outside, you can see clearly, the only way to truly win a game of manipulation is not to win it at all, but to leave it behind. Walking away is not weakness. It is the deepest form of strength, a strength rooted in clarity, self-respect, and the refusal to let your life be dictated by someone else's need for control. And when you do it, you don't just leave the game. You leave it for good. Detachment is one of the most misunderstood concepts in human relationships. Many think it means not caring, shutting down, or building an emotional fortress. In truth, detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. It is the ability to remain fully present in a relationship or situation without being swallowed whole by it. It is loving without losing yourself, listening without absorbing poison, and giving without bleeding yourself dry. When someone plays with your emotions, they count on your attachment. They expect you to react, to cling, to chase after the approval or validation they strategically withhold. They rely on the fact that your self-worth is tangled up with their opinion of you. Detachment breaks this chain. It allows you to stand beside them without being pulled into the current they create. Detachment doesn't mean you stop feeling. In fact, it sharpens your feelings. You begin to notice the difference between genuine connection and emotional bait. You learn to see the waves without being tossed by them. When someone tries to provoke you, you can observe the attempt as if watching a scene in a play, aware of the performance but no longer a character in it. This perspective shifts everything. You stop trying to control how others behave, because you realize that's a game you can never win. Instead, you focus entirely on your own responses. If they throw words meant to hurt, you decide whether to catch them or let them fall. If they withdraw affection to punish you, you refuse to beg for it back. Your calm becomes the wall their chaos cannot climb. In this state, you no longer measure your worth by their moods. You no longer let someone else's storm determine your weather. This is why detachment is a form of emotional self-defense. It allows you to participate in life without being consumed by it. You can love someone deeply while still recognizing when their actions are harmful. You can forgive without excusing. You can care without collapsing. The beauty of detachment is that it turns manipulation into noise you can walk past instead of a song you're forced to dance to. The guilt trip becomes background chatter. The silent treatment becomes simply silence. The criticism loses its sting because it no longer finds a wound to land in. In this way, detachment is less about pulling away from others and more about standing firmly within yourself. And here's where transformation happens. The energy you once used to manage someone else's emotional weather is now free. You can invest it in your own growth, creativity, and joy. You start to experience relationships as a choice rather than an obligation. You stay because you want to, not because you need to. That shift is where real freedom begins. Over time, detachment becomes a lens through which you view the world. You see that people's behavior is often a reflection of their own inner battles, not a verdict on your worth. You learn to let their storms pass without rushing to be their umbrella, and in doing so you realize something profound. You cannot be played in a game where you have nothing to lose. This is not the numb detachment of apathy. It is the vibrant detachment of self-possession. It is knowing that your peace is yours to protect and no one's hands belong on it but your own. In the end, detachment is not about leaving people behind. It's about never leaving yourself behind. And when you master that, you find that most of the games people play lose their power because they were only ever won through your participation. When the game ends, the first thing you notice is not the absence of the other person. It's the absence of the noise. The constant calculations, the second guessing, the invisible pressure you carried every day, it all falls silent. At first, this silence can feel strange, even unsettling, because you've grown so accustomed to the background hum of tension. But then, slowly, you realize that this is not emptiness. It is peace. Peace after the game is unlike any victory celebration. There's no applause, no trophy, no public acknowledgement of what you've overcome. Instead, it's a quiet shift inside you, a deep exhale you didn't even know you were holding. You wake up in the morning without the dread of what subtle attack might come. You go to sleep at night without replaying a conversation in your head, wondering what you could have said differently. And here's the beauty of it: this peace is not fragile. It does not depend on them changing or apologizing. It is not conditional on the world finally being fair. It exists because you stopped feeding the very thing that kept you in turmoil. You stepped out of the arena, and without your energy sustaining it, the game simply ceased to exist. This kind of peace transforms how you see life. You no longer approach relationships as a survival test. You no longer scan for hidden motives in every word spoken to you. Instead, you learn to trust yourself again, to trust that you will notice the signs of manipulation early, to trust that you will act in your own best interest without hesitation. Your time, once consumed by emotional defense, becomes available for creation. You begin investing in the things that nourish you, friendships that feel like home, work that aligns with your values, moments of stillness where you can simply breathe. You find joy in simple things: reading a book without interruption, walking without a destination, laughing without wondering if it will be used against you later. But peace after the game is not just about enjoying what is. It's also about understanding what was. You can look back at the patterns without bitterness, seeing them for what they were: lessons in awareness, boundaries, and self-respect. You realize that the manipulator did not steal years of your life. They showed you where you needed to stand guard over your own soul. In that way, even the pain becomes part of the wisdom you carry forward. Over time, you stop thinking of it as retiring from the game. That word suggests you might one day return, or that the game still matters. The truth is, you've moved beyond it entirely. You've outgrown the need to prove anything to people who feed on power struggles. You've found a way of living where your emotional well-being is not up for negotiation. And here's the paradox: the moment you reach this place of peace, you become unplayable, not because you've learned every trick, but because you no longer offer yourself as a piece in anyone's game. People can try the same tactics they once used, but they fall flat. You see through them instantly, and instead of reacting, you simply smile and keep walking. This is the real victory. Not that you've beaten someone else, but that you've reclaimed yourself. The game is over, not because you destroyed the other player, but because you've left the board entirely. And in that quiet, steady freedom, you finally understand that the greatest prize in any game is not winning. It's choosing not to play at all. So here we are, the board is empty, the pieces are still. The noise has faded, and you are standing, not as a winner in the way the world defines winning, but as someone who has chosen a different kind of victory. You are no longer someone's pawn, no longer someone's project, no longer someone's emotional punching bag. You are your own. You've learned the game, not to play it better, but to see it for what it is. You've drawn your lines, walked away when the ground was poisoned, and mastered the art of loving without chains. You've discovered the strength in silence, the freedom in detachment, and the peace that follows when you stop pouring your life into the hands of those who only wanted to control it. This was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming the one thing you can never afford to lose: yourself. The manipulator may never admit you've won. They may never apologize, never change, never understand the damage they caused. But that no longer matters, because your life is no longer shaped by their recognition. Now, the only game worth playing is the one you design. A game where the rules are kindness, the moves are growth, and the goal is a life that feels like yours every single day. And here's the truth: you don't owe anyone an explanation for your peace. You don't have to justify the boundaries you set or the exits you take. You are allowed to protect yourself without permission. So let this be your stand. From this day forward, you are not here to be played. You are here to live, and if anyone tries to pull you back onto that board, remember, your power is not in the moves you make, but in the games you refuse to join. Walk in clarity, guard your peace, and never, ever forget, the greatest victory is not winning the wrong battle. It's choosing the right life.